Hello and welcome to Bonsai with Tom. Today we are going to prune my Crassula ovata forest. You can see it's pretty grown up. It's quite healthy. I call this my Misfit jade forest because, well, I just had a bunch of singular jades that were cuttings and whatnot. I wasn't really sure what to do with them. So I put them in a forest, and I think that's kind of a good strategy if you have a bunch of trees that actually, this tree is actually looking quite nice, but everything's quite full at the moment. It looks more like a jungle than a forest. But yeah, you can combine them and have a really nice forest. Also, you can put like a specimen tree kind of as the main tree and then surround it with, lesser impressive trees, and that's a good strategy. But today I'm just going to give it a prune. Probably a pretty heavy prune. It's really kind of overgrown. We have a lot of large leaves, and I need to thin it out and develop more compact growth and more ramification. So it has, just more detail and is more convincing as a forest. So I think what I'll do, I'll just start with this main tree and get it pruned up, and then work my way around. So first I've got some stuff coming straight up like that. I want to just take it off and any large leaves that I don't want, and just try to get it under control. You can see I've got this big branch here, comes out into two, and that's another thing you want to do is sort of take the branches from one to two. Um, and you sort of want in general the branches to come up and out like that, rather than, you don't want it crossing the trunk or cutting back into the forest. And you can see I've also got some growth with some long internodes here. So I want to change in direction in the branches and the trunk. So if I prune this, I will typically get two new branches right near where I pruned on the next lowest leaf, and that will be a change in direction and also taper. So it'll go from being thicker to thinner, which is also what you want. Similar to that, you can see we've got some kind of large leaves. And I want smaller leaves. I don't want these big leaves. So by cutting it back, as you get more ramification, the leaves get smaller and smaller, and it just becomes more convincing. Here's some more straight up growth. I'll just take that out of there. So I really want the primary branches to be defined on this tree. And, as I look at this main tree, it basically has two lower branches going down on the same side, and this one right out of the ground is kind of really coarse looking. So I'm going to prune it up and prune up the entire forest, and then probably do a little bit of structural pruning where, I'm sort of picking branches, doing branch selection so I can have branches that I think are really much better for the long term growth of the bonsai. This one is kind of coming this way, so I probably want to remove that. If you watch my channel much, you probably see that I tend to kind of cut it back to the first one or two sets of leaves, because I find that gives you a combination of small leaves, more ramification and taper, and more compactness. So I sort of let it grow a bit. Sometimes I let it grow maybe a bit too much, and then cut it back, and then just keep repeating that process. And over time, your branches and your trunk will get thicker, your branches will develop character where they're kind of like curvy and windy and going from thick to thin, and you'll have more branches coming out as you go along the branch, so it sort of gets nice and thick and just really becomes more refined and just a charming tree to look at. So yeah, I'm kind of getting this down to the basics now, where I'm really sort of picking leaves I want and getting rid of stuff that's growing straight down. I sort of want it to grow out horizontally. I don't want things growing straight up or straight down. It's kind of okay if it goes at an angle either way in that case, but it really sort of depends on, what you're trying to do with that specific branch. And, so I'm going to cut this one way back as well. You really want to cut the tops back hard because those are closest to the light and they're going to grow with the most vigor. And, you really want to encourage the tree to grow more, closer to the ground because that's where you want your biggest, largest branches so that it looks like a tree, how a tree grows. When you're pruning these forests like this, it can be a little hard to fully see the tree you're currently working on. So, sometimes it helps to put your hand back there. Some people put like a bag or a cloth. I'm just kind of winging it here because I know it might be hard to see in the video, but in my three-dimensional bonsai studio, I can really see what's going on here. And yeah, this tree is finally getting some curves, and we're getting to the top of it. And so I am gonna cut the top back hard, and then we will move on to the next tree. And it's always amazing to me too with these forests as you start clearing it out. The shape and the nature of the forest kind of comes back, and you can see it again because you can tell. I mean, well, even now it just looks like I don't know, like a large bucket of jade that you might find that you buy at the Home Depot or something, right? And so we really want to be able to see each tree and see into the forest and see the individual trunks and see the ground and, imagine that, you can sort of walk a path in there like you would in a normal forest, and that's kind of the impression of what we're going for. And I'm getting close on this first main tree. And it also helps if I think when you're pruning a forest, I often start with the main tree because depending on how hard you cut that back, you're really kind of setting the tone and the size for the rest of the trees in the forest. Um, and it's sort of just by taking things step by step, um, and continuing to prune and just relax and enjoy yourself before you know it, you're done, and the forest looks much better than it did before you started. I don't know if I've talked about this before, but this pot is, it's a bright red pot, but it kind of has some black speckles in it and this kind of gray rim. And I was a little reluctant to try such a pot. I think that main tree is kind of done for now, so I'm going to prune off some of these lower tiny trees, which are really there to give scale, to sort of make the big trees look bigger. And oftentimes I just prune these so they look more like a bush, although as they get bigger and bigger over time, I expose more of the trunk so that they do actually look like tiny trees. And many times a leaf will fall down and sprout and grow here, so I may move it or just kind of get rid of it if it doesn't work with what I'm trying to do. But I think these two are pretty nice. I typically like to have a couple of small ones near the front, oftentimes out near the edge to sort of fill out space. Um, But yeah, these ones have gotten way too tall, and so I just prune them back. But yeah, what I was saying about the pot, like I like the red pot, but sometimes I find myself buying pots that I really like, but I can't find a match for a tree. Like I have quite a few purple pots, which I absolutely love. Um, but they can be tough to match a tree in, especially I have a few of my succulents that get sort of like yellow leaves that almost look like flowers. So, I definitely want to put those in a purple pot because I think that would really pop like the purple and yellow combination. Although that also works with blue. Maybe not so good with red, but I think the red and green here works well because you sort of get the silver of the jade bark kind of matches the ring around the top of the pot. And then the bright red is kind of a contrast with all the green foliage, and it's also nice in the. If you can stress the jade, you'll get red tips on the leaves, which also kind of reflect the pot. So it's actually a pretty nice combination. I was surprised. I wasn't sure how kind of a bright red garish pot would work, but this one works well. And I also it's kind of a matte finish. It's not like a gloss pot, which I also like because I do like, particularly with smaller pots, I like kind of some color. And, like a glaze, like a glossy glaze with a sharp color, I think looks really good. But I find that the bigger the pot gets, that really breaks down. I think there's just too much shine and too much gloss. So I kind of don't. Usually the larger pots, I want sort of a, I don't know, like an eggshell luster or something. I want it to sort of absorb light rather than reflect it because I think as it gets big, the pot just kind of grabs your eye and you don't see the tree. So the second tree getting trimmed here. This one has kind of a nice shape. It's actually it's kind of leaning in, like if you see it from the front, it leans in a bit to the right. And I don't know, we'll see. Maybe I'm going to prune that. It's kind of, there's definitely some confusion now with that because I sort of like all the trunks kind of coming up at the same angle. Like if you look at a real forest, that typically happens because they've kind of, grown there since they were seedlings, and the sun is consistent. So unless something fell on one or become damaged in some way, they sort of have a they sort of have a consistent angle to their trunks. Although, I mean, you can break that rule if you want to, but I find that it doesn't look quite natural if you do that. Like the trees, they're kind of a family. They're kind of a similar age, similar, maybe the same species, and they've grown up in the same environment, so they tend to be look like a family of trees, like they belong together. It definitely takes a while to prune these forests, because I mean, basically, it's sort of getting back to what I was saying before. If you have a bunch of sort of singular specimen trees and you want to save space, or you're just tired of watering them all, caring for them all, you can put them in one pot like this. But basically, what that means is like instead of pruning one tree, I'm pruning, I don't know how many are in this one, two, three, four, I don't know, seven or eight, maybe nine trees. So obviously it takes longer because there's a lot more thought that goes into it and a lot more pruning. And it's a bit more complicated because you're sort of pruning each tree and styling it in relation to the other trees. So they sort of impact each other um, based on the overall style of the forest and then their proximity to one another and basically how light would kind of go through the forest. But I'm slowly getting the second one. I really probably should have pruned this earlier, but I was just kind of letting it run. And these jades love to be pruned, so there's really no concern about killing them, particularly if you keep some leaves on. I'm not going to totally defoliate this. I'm just taking it back to kind of the abstract shape. Um, and I think you can see already, like, when you prune them, give them a little love and prune them, it really does take on the appearance of a tree, especially when, I've got multiple branches here and I'm starting to get more ramification and taper. And yeah, so we just keep pruning and letting it grow, and it just gets better and better over time and looks more charming and realistic. You can see here on this, this branch is kind of hides the entire tree behind it. Um, and I don't know. I mean, it's not like it's a fairly interesting branch. But I'm sort of wondering. You see how it almost its trunk kind of crosses the trunk of the tree to the left, which I'm not all that crazy about. But this is the kind of thing you do when you're pruning. You kind of want to look at it from the front, and that helps you prune the trees because they all have to work together in concert, and so that's really what you're going for. So I've never really been happy with like what I was just mentioning about these two trees on the left, but I'm going to just keep going and get everything pruned up and tidied up and shortened. Um, and then I'll come back and look at that because especially when it's overgrown like this, it is really hard to see the overall shape of the forest. So you want to measure twice and cut once. so that you're actually, you know, you don't make some cuts that are totally inconsistent or make the forest look unbalanced. And this is also a pretty sizable tree in the right here, which is kind of good. I think it sort of fills out that side of the pot. But it has really taken off, and some of these leaves have gotten quite large, so it really needs to be cut back. And, I'm always kind of going for sort of an asymmetrical triangle shape, at least one triangle. I sort of like maybe two, if you can do that, or three. I mean, this is a forest, but it's not that big of a forest. The pot is, I don't know, 12, 13 inches wide, so it's not huge. So it is kind of hard, especially with trees that are kind of larger like this as part of a forest, to introduce multiple triangles. But we'll see. I'll probably try to get two, which I kind of like, and you sort of want to make it asymmetrical. Usually looks good, but sometimes I don't know. I've seen symmetrical ones that also look great, almost like a pyramid shape that completely worked. So yeah, it sort of depends on the specific situation. This weekend, yesterday, as a matter of fact, we had the Puget Sound Bonsai Association fall um, sale. So it's actually it's super exciting, and we had just fabulous weather. So it was so beautiful. I should actually start, um, videotaping some of this because it's really interesting. We have a lot of pretty famous bonsai people here in the Pacific Northwest, and it would be fun to, just say hi and kind of get their take on things. But it was really just a beautiful, beautiful day and a huge turnout. I've been going to these things for, um, well, I went many years ago, and then I've re-engaged for the last 3 years or so. And the weather's always a wild card here in November in Seattle. But boy, it was just, you couldn't have asked for a better day. And so, and it's so nice because at this specific event, like individual members can sell stuff they have, whether it's plants or entire trees or whatever. But then also there are a lot of folks that are kind of in the business that do this as well. So a lot of potters. I met so many interesting potters, and it's a great opportunity to kind of pick their brains and ask about the specific pot you're thinking about buying, and usually the prices are very, very good. I mean, I basically take this opportunity to just stock up on stuff. I'm just hacking this guy back as we're talking, getting rid of big stuff and branches that are going the wrong way. But yeah, so I kept. I had a nice selection of pots, and I met some of the folks that watch the channel here regularly, so that's always really, really nice. I have a shout out to Nate and I have just become better and better friends over the last, I don't know, well, ever since I started this channel. I guess we're going on, is it 2 years? And yeah, just a great guy. All the people I've met in this bonsai community are just fabulous, including um, all the potters that I've made. Candied Clay, I bought quite a few pots from them. And I'm embarrassed to say, I think I bought 3 pots from this gentleman. I've never bought pots before, but he had basically, it was kind of, these pots he was selling were totally in my wheelhouse. They were kind of Shohin size and the right depth, and I really like the color of them. And I'm a sucker for kind of blue shades and then also kind of an oval shape. And the more I talked to him, we just had such a similar philosophy on what we really like in a pot. And so, I ended up buying quite a few of those. So I don't know if I'll do it on this video because I have to offload it and process all that stuff, but I will show those. I'll do a pot haul video soon where I show you the pots that I got, either as a complete video or as kind of like an extra um, at the end of one of my shows, because I think it's really interesting. And while I can still remember it, I can give you some of the details that the potters gave me. And I actually got some really interesting pots. One in particular, I've never seen one like it, and I really like it, and I just hope it's going to work for a tree that I have. So we're continuing to cook with gas here. I'm kind of working on this last kind of larger tree in the back, and yeah, I think we've already done a lot of great work. It's much easier to see the profile of the forest and the trees. And so we'll cut this one back, and then it's like as I normally like to do. I sort of like to take a short breather and step back and have a look at it. You can see it's still quite thick here in the back, and so I will finish up pruning these large leaves off here and getting rid of the stuff that's easy to remove, and then I usually take a few more spins around the old turntable and then really hone in on stuff that is kind of bothering me that I think removing it will greatly improve the shape of the forest. And we're certainly getting close there. I just want to get the last bits of this big stuff down, cut. This tree in the back has kind of a nice shape to it. It always amazes me how you know, they don't look like much. Like I said, this is my misfit forest, so I just threw stuff in here. I wasn't particularly excited about it, didn't know what to do. And yeah, over time, those trees become quite charming. So let's take a look at it from the front here. So I look at this and see how this is crossing into the main tree, and it's just very confusing, right? I mean, if you look at it from slightly to the right, it's a little better, but it's really just not good. So I'm going to remove this because I think we want a little space. And yeah, I don't want the confusion of the crossing trunks. And already that's way better, because now these trees are much more in harmony. And this guy looks a little tall, so I'm going to take that one down a bit. And continuing to work on this back tree, I think it's a little thick. We can kind of make it much more sparse, and basically that'll cause it to grow, in the direction that we want it to, and fill in where we want it to. So I'm gonna take this down, and much in the way you remove branches that go up and down, you can do the same thing with the leaves. Like if I cut these off, what will generally happen is you'll get a new set of smaller leaves, where you cut off the previous one. And yeah, I think I'm going to take a bit more off this. Always helps to use the turntable to just continually spin it around, and you can sort of see stuff that's distracting like that. And yeah, so I think that's an improvement. You can sort of see the shape and just the general structure of the tree, which I've said many times in this channel. I think is a good strategy to prune just a bit more than what you think you need to do, and I think that usually ends you up in a pretty good spot. So I'm just going to clear off some of the leaves and debris that have fallen down here. I think for me it's especially in this pruning at the end where I'm sort of doing more structural pruning and getting rid of branches that I think are inconsistent or distracting or like non-harmonious. If you got to get the garbage out of there because you're really going for what change can I do right now to make this thing look so much better? And I think by having, debris on the ground, it makes it harder to see that. So that's, I always do that. And it gives you a little break. You're sort of doing some good work you have to do anyway, and setting up for, giving your brain and eyes a little rest as you look for the next improvement that you want to make. So I think this right side is pretty good. I mean, I may come back and shorten some of those branches, but this area here still just really bothers me, and I'm wondering, maybe I could take this off because there's sort of a U shape here. Let me just shorten this one way down. And, I could also change the front slightly. maybe create a little more space. I don't really need this because that's just going to clutter that section of the tree. But, the more I look at it, I think this area and actually this whole tree, I mean, I guess I could change the angle of it slightly, but I don't know if that's really going to solve my main issue I have, which is that this main tree and that tree behind it, um, in this U shape, I also don't like. Looks kind of like a slingshot from this angle. So I'm thinking maybe we will take one of these or both of these off because I think the right side looks pretty good. Um, but the left side is sort of crowded and just kind of a jumble. Like you can't see either tree because one, the main tree is in front of the other one, and and the back tree is behind it, and it just kind of jumbles it together, and it's just very crowded looking. Let's see. I'm gonna think about it a bit. Yeah, the more I look at it, I think if I were to take this off, it's actually what I'm thinking of doing. Like, how would that, I think that would make the initial tree, the primary tree, much taller. But, this base it's got some big sections. So I'm just trying to imagine what this will look like if I take this off. I do find it quite charming, and I think as the tree gets fatter, those big initial segments would sort of sort themselves out. But I also think if I took this off, it really makes the main tree much more of a focal point. And it also helps with the depth of the forest because the trees behind it in the back of the forest, giving you that forest perspective, they've got a lot of low branches. And I think they fill in nicely. So I think I am going to take this off. So, as Nigel Saunders says, big cut coming up. And you want to take your time with this. You can take multiple cuts. And boy, that would make a nice little tree, but I have too many jades, so it's not going to happen. And yeah, I think that looks way better. It's much cleaner. Now I can appreciate both trees. I have a nice triangle, clean lines. I do. Still want to move that tree in the left, change its angle a little bit, but I'm not going to do that now. And another thing with jades, like I find you can come in as close as you can get. You really want the cut to be flush with the trunk, and these grow so quickly, especially if you let them run a little wild, that they will oftentimes, um, in a relatively short period of time, maybe a year, you can barely see where you took a large limb off like this, and then also certainly in a couple of years you won't see it. Because yeah, you can see this is a pretty good size branch we took off. You do want to be a bit careful. Like jades do have a tendency to get, um, I guess it's bacteria. They can become infected, and you definitely want to keep it dry until this wound skins over. Because water, if this gets wet and stays wet for any length of time, root rot can set in, and then you can lose the whole jade. But yeah, I find a small pair of scissors like this, you can really just kind of fine tune the cut and smooth it right off. Just be careful you don't cut yourself because that's easy to do. And I think a good thought for the day, I've kind of mentioned it a few times already while I'm finishing this up, is that this misfit forest idea is pretty nice, right? I mean, if you have a bunch of trees or even a bunch of cuttings, you can, especially with jade because they propagate so easily, you can make use of them in a forest, and it's actually a lot of fun because, as I said, you sort of get the economy of using less space. They're easier to care for, and you can get some very interesting compositions with it. Like this looks so much better now than when we started, and they're sort of inexpensive material to work with, and I find them very charming. And so, yeah, if you have a bunch of trees you don't know what to do with, see how they might work in a forest setting because I find that the sum of the parts, what is it the saying? Yeah, the sum of the parts is sometimes much greater than what you might think it would be. Um, and so I'm just going to shorten these up a little, and I really do like how removing the confusion of the forest and also this individual main tree. I think it's much uh, more convincing now. Is it just a taller tree, and you can really see, the primary structure in the top here, and you don't notice kind of that, uh, large trunk that we just took off. I think it's much more charming this way. So take a little spin and see if there's anything else we don't like about the forest. You definitely want to look at it from all angles. I mean, obviously the front is kind of the primary thing, which is really what I was focusing on here for the structural pruning. But you kind of want it to look good from all angles. Like this, I feel is a little wild, and I think we can shorten that, and it's not going to negatively impact the tree from the front. And look at it from the back. Actually doesn't look too bad from the back. I think what I normally do at this stage, I'm just taking off all the large leaves, because you want the leaves to be a consistent size throughout the forest. Again, you don't want to notice undesirable things, and the best way to take care of that is to just get rid of them. So I'll do a few more fine tunings on here, but I think we're pretty much done with this one. And aftercare, you really, as I said, you really want to keep this pretty dry. Certainly, if you have large wounds like the one I have there, until that heals. And also in general, because we've taken a ton of leaves off of this, and so the plant's not going to need a lot of water because it doesn't have any. It's not taking up water. Um, so yeah, I tend to let it go a bit longer after having pruned it, and it'll let you know when it needs water again. And I think this looks pretty good. I got a little more debris down here, and it's kind of a great improvement. I think we did some great work on this. It's much, much better than it was. You can actually see the individual trees and appreciate them. I think going forward, I want a bit more on the left over here, kind of down low, and I can probably, that small tree that's kind of in the front can fill in that space to make it a little more filled in, I guess, for lack of a better description. This will heal, and we'll let some of the branches behind this tree down low expand, so you get some green back there, so it gives it more of a three-dimensional um, appearance. But yeah, that's a wrap, and I want to thank you for spending time with me, and I look forward to seeing you all again very, very soon.